Yo guys, Hexinkwix here. Remember that Montana cans unboxing I did for you? Well, today's the day I'm going to review them. I will pre-warn you now that this video might be quite lengthy, just because of the different combinations. For example, there's all the different sizes of markers, there's the occasional different tip, and then there's the different colours as well. Not to mention the different surfaces I have to test it on as well, along with other little things. With that being said though, I will try and cut out all the unnecessary things for you to try and shorten the video. So I'll be doing the markers in size order and then be doing black followed by chrome. I'll be filling the markers from brand new and pumping them from brand new as well, just to show you how quickly the paint flows into the nib. As usual, I'll start on normal plain copier paper, then I'll move on to Mountboard, then I'll move on to some plastic. So I'll start off with a 1.5mm tip extra fine marker. Now this tip is entirely made of plastic, so the paint doesn't need to be absorbed all the way through the nib, therefore allowing it to be juiced in just one pump, because the paint simply flows over the plastic to the tip at the end. Just with a normal amount of pressure there is a nice thin crisp line, but that's just with normal pressure, not to mention all the variance in pressure and pen angles which you can see me doing here. I would use it similar to how you would shade with a pencil and use the side, and then I'd use the tip directly as well. And then with each of these I do different pressure settings, lightly flicking on the tip or hardly pressing on the tip. Surprisingly the paper isn't warping even though this is acrylic, but that's probably just because there's a fine amount of acrylic on the paper and it can deal with it. The flow of the marker also seems really good and just really nice to work with as well. Now I'll move on to the same marker but just with chrome paint inside it instead. Once again the tip is filled with paint really easily just because of it being made of plastic, and the lines are nice, sharp and crisp. Now I'll move on to the fine marker in black, but instead of using the normal tip, I'm using the 6mm chisel tip. Now since this is of the porous material nib, it will take a while longer to juice up. Obviously with a bigger tip, you're going to need to play around with the marker a bit just so there isn't any breakages in the line, which is what you can see me doing here. Now similar to the previous marker, I muck around with the different pressures and angles of the nib. And the great thing about chisel tips is obviously you can get this nice broad line, but then if you also use the edges of the tip you can get a really nice thin line. I mean the thinner lines that I'm making here are easily near enough the same as what the extra fine marker would make. I use both the back edge and the front edge just to show you how you can get these fine lines. And obviously when you combine the fine edge of the tip with the broadness of the tip, that's how you get your calligraphic strokes. Now since I'm done with the chisel tip, I'll replace it with the normal nib and show you guys how this works. Similar to before, it won't juice up as quickly just because of how the paint needs to soak up in the porous material. And once again I'm showing you how you can get different marks by applying different pressures and using different angles of the marker. This is definitely more a small filling in marker or a outline marker. But compared to the extra fine marker, which I'd say would be more for detailing, with this marker with the 6mm chisel tip in it, I'd even arguably say that it gives you all the benefits of this marker and the extra fine marker as well, because you have the wide space of the chisel tip to fill in, and then you've also got the sharp edges to outline with as well. Now I'll move on to the chrome marker that has the normal tip in it as well. And surprisingly this one seems to juice up a lot quicker. This must just be something to do with the paint formula, because with different paint colours they have different formulas and that affects their overall characteristics, such as flow and opacity for example. Once again I'm just showing you the different marks you can make, especially with this top line which is a taper, where I vary my pressures, starting it with a light soft touch, applying more pressure and then going back to the soft touch as well just to finish it off. Now I'll try the chrome with the chisel tip. With the extra fine marker I didn't really notice it as much, but I was expecting this chrome to not so much be a chrome and not shine and just be a sort of silvery colour, but this chrome actually shines quite well, which is surprising considering all it is water based. Now you might have noticed in a few of the marks I've made just generally through this video that the lines aren't solid because there'll be little bits within the marker that's not juiced up, and then this will transfer onto the page as a break within the line. Now I thought I'd do a coverage test with these markers just because it's a little bit easier to colour in than trying to colour in with an extra fine marker. But I'll be doing a chrome rectangle along with a black rectangle. I have left these to dry for a few minutes before painting over them. But as expected, with this being acrylic paint, it covers it no problem. Now if you weren't to leave it to dry, then you might run into some problems. And if you were to use it on a different surface, then it might also cause some problems as well because of how the paint reacts to the surface. It might take a lot longer to dry, and if it's a seriously smooth surface, then the pressure that you apply to the marker might actually end up dragging the paint off if it's that smooth. You could even try layering the chrome up multiple times just to see whether it'll shine any more drastically. Now move on to the 15mm black with the multi-line chisel tip in it. Similar to before, this one will take quite a lot longer to juice up, even more so than the 2mm, just because there's more material for the paint to soak up into. But I'd highly recommend to flood the marker just so the tip is extra juiced up. After using this marker for a few lines, I can already tell that there's quite a bit of ink on the page, and this is causing the paper to warp a little bit. As I expected, this is just a normal sort of 15mm line, but it has obviously the gap between it. But once again, like with the 16mm chisel, you can always use the edge just to get a thinner line. Now I'll use the default tip for the 15mm marker. Once again, here's a demonstration of how the line can be broken from when a new tip is juiced up. But all you need to do to remedy this is just muck around and generally play about with the marker for a little bit, and then this unjuiced bit within the nib will fill up with paint. And similar to all the other markers, I'm just showing you here how you can get different sized marks by using the marker in different ways, such as using the edge or even the corner. Now I'll move on to the chrome variation. And with what I said before with using the chrome in the 6mm chisel, moving up in terms of sizes, it really shows off the shininess of the chrome. I'm seriously liking this water-based acrylic chrome. This chrome, considering it's water-based, is in a league of its own. Now since I'm finished with a 15mm marker, I'll move on to the next one, which is double the width, which is the 30mm. Now this nib will definitely take a while to juice up, just because of the sheer size of surface area that the paint has to soak up into. Now the 15mm and 30mm are definitely designed as a calligraphic marker, but equally can be used to fill large spaces. For example, these markers will be great for colouring a background with. Now, as usual, with the black done, I'll move on to the chrome. And with the sheer surface area of what the 30mm covers, it works perfectly with this chrome, giving the chrome more body to really shine. Now I thought I'd leave the best till last and review the mop tip last. Now with how mop markers are, the nibs are just basically a thin sheet of fabric that is held in place with plastic. And with mop markers being renowned for their high paint output, it won't take long to juice up a mop marker nib at all. Now obviously if I'm going to be reviewing a mop marker, I have to do a drip test. So what I thought I'd do is do the drip test on paper. As for dripping, paper is probably one of the worst materials you can use it on, as paper obviously absorbs some of the paint. So this would sort of give a worst case scenario in terms of drips. While anything else such as metal, plastic, or maybe even some wood would be better than paper simply because it doesn't absorb the paint. Although I probably wouldn't recommend using one of these on a textured surface just because I can imagine it rips the nib up. As you can see, I do a dot and then a line. First dot and line is with no squeezing on the bottle. The second dot and line is with a light amount of squeezing on the bottle, and the third dot and line is with an average squeezing of the bottle. Now with all the different markers tested on copy paper, I'll move on to Mountboard. I'll only be using one marker on different surfaces because we're testing the paint on these surfaces, not so much the markers themselves. And to be honest, the paint reacts pretty much exactly the same as how it did on paper. But the benefit with Mountboard is that with it being thicker and a lot sturdier, you don't have to worry about the Mountboard warping, unlike how paper would when a thick amount of paint is applied. As you can see here in this coverage test, it looks exactly the same as how it does on paper. Now with the paint tested on Mountboard, I'll then move on to plastic. And as you can see, the paint reacts pretty much the same as what it has done on paper and Mountboard as what it does to on plastic. And this is one of the great things about acrylic paint. It can be used on pretty much any surface. In summary, I think very highly of the Montana acrylic paint line. With the water base, it flows very well, but this doesn't compromise for opacity at all. The opacity stays high and offers a bold colour, and I'll be really interested into seeing what the other colours are like. Reds, pinks, greens, blues, and etc. I really like the idea of the applicator tip set working in cooperation with the 25ml bottles, as this gives them a sort of further purpose than just a little bottle. But unfortunately, I don't think their choice in nibs is wise. I personally dislike these types of nibs that they use. I more so prefer the Montana Black style of nibs, where you can just totally remove them without having a stem system and they're reversible. However, they might have used these types of nibs instead because these markers aren't just for calligraphy, they're for art purposes as a whole. So the rounded corners might be to benefit other purposes, for example blending possibly. These colours are also totally intermixable and you can mix several colours together to create your own shade. And also what I really like is that these colours are matched alongside the Montana Gold spray paints, so you can work with mixed media. I'd once again like to thank Montana Cans and Global Art Supplies for supplying me with these markers to be able to perform reviews for you guys like this. Hope you've enjoyed this video guys. This has been Hex Inkworks with the Montana Cans acrylic marker line review. Peace.